What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We're here with some more DraftKings picks, this time for UFC Vegas 91. MMA picks, lineup advice, DraftKings and FanDuel, best bets, everything you need to crush this card. We have Matheus Nicolau and Alex Perez. 12 other fights to go through as well. Welcome. I am Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy. We had a week off after UFC 300, but we're back once again. I'm joined, as always, by Jake the Snake, owner of MMADFS.com. Jake, what's up, man? How was your week off?
It was nice, man. Get caught up on some stuff, and now we get right back in there with, super high level slate, probably equal to UFC 300.
At least equal to UFC 300. We have so many fighters on this card that have less than 4 fights in the UFC, and we're going to talk about a lot of them. So if you're new here, welcome. What we do is we break down the main event, Nicolau and Perez, from a betting and DFS perspective. We will analyze the 3 newcomers on the card, what we can expect from them in their octagon debuts. We'll play good fighter, good matchup, bad matchup for those fighters that have less than 4 fights in the UFC. Give some context to their UFC stats, their fantasy points per game, and their fight logs. And then we'll close it out with our underdog fantasy pick'em play of the slate, a fight that you have to target in DFS, and our stream parlay of the week. Let's not waste any more time. Jake, Nicolau Perez. Model is not a huge fan of this fight in general, and judging by your write-ups, you think that it has a chance to be lower paced, lower scoring as well. So talk to me about this matchup, how you expect it to play out, and more importantly, what it means for DFS.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you just look at most of Nikolau's fights, the way he approaches every single matchup is he's evading contact, he's circling around the outside the octagon. Sometimes he'll land takedowns, but he hasn't really been landing very many uh, in his recent fights. And now he's going against a wrestler in Alex Perez, who has a good takedown defense. So I'm not really expecting a ton of takedowns from either guy, just because they both have good takedown defenses. So it's going to probably be a striking battle. You look at, the volume, it hasn't really been there for Nicolau. You look at the finishes, they haven't really been there. He has one finish since his 2015 UFC debut, which was against Matt Schnell. I mean, everyone finishes Matt Schnell, so I don't think that's like a huge accomplishment. I know Alex Perez has been pretty submission prone, but you got a guy in Nicolau who hasn't really submitted anybody in the UFC at least since 2015. He had one submission outside of the UFC after he got cut, I believe, in 2018. But in terms of the UFC submissions, it's been a while. I think Alex Perez will probably be a little more cautious to avoid getting submitted. We just saw him go the distance against Mikhaev, who's a submission threat. That was only 8 weeks ago. He was able to stay out of danger there. I would say Mikhaev is probably more of a submission threat than Nicolau. But who knows? I mean, Perez has been pretty submittable in the past, typically against higher level opponents, Figueiredo, Pantoja. Like the guys who have been submitting him have been, world champions. So you can't hold it against them too much. But yeah, I just really think it's going to be lower volume. They're similar age, similar number of UFC fights. Nicolas 7-2, 31 years old. Perez is 32 years old, 6-4. Perez is coming off 3 straight losses, not ideal. Hasn't won a fight since 2020. Yeah, I don't know, man. I just see it being lower volume. I just think that Nicolau is probably going to do the same thing he does every single fight, whereas be a counter striker, evading around the outside, force Perez to come to him. Perez has good leg kicks, could slow Nicolau down. I just don't think it's the most action-packed main event. Obviously, as soon as I say that, it's going to be a complete barn burner. Land
Every
200
time.
significant strikes, but it does seem to set up for a lower scoring, lower pace main event where, we'll probably need a finish for someone to really score well. I don't think we're going to get a big volume driven score in a decision. And I think it's probably going to be close. I mean, most of Nicolau's fights are close because they come down to fewer exchanges because he's not landing a ton. So it's like, okay, well, that round it was 15-13 in significant strikes, 2-1, with no takedowns. So I think we're going to see a close fight. I think in those situations, you probably want to get the plus money on the underdog most of the time. Or, if you're betting it, fight goes the distance can be had at plus money for a guy that's lower volume. I think that's pretty solid. But for DFS, I think it's a good fade spot on Nicolau. It's always dangerous fading the main event favorite, but it's some pretty good leverage generally because you get a high owned guy. And if he does bust, then you get great leverage and you can be, over the field in a bunch of other spots. So I am still going to stack it in low risk. It's not my favorite low risk stack ever, but I think there's a pretty good chance it runs longer and both guys, score enough that it makes sense. And on a slate where there's a lot of uncertainty, we have a lot of guys that we got we have a lot of low level fighters on this slate. When you have like Ivana Petrovic at -500, you're like, okay, like that sets the tone for the slate. So it's not like we have a bunch of people we can trust. We've got guys like Deniz -350 making his debut. Like it's a pretty it's a pretty sketchy slate. So I do think you stack it in low risk. You don't have to play one in high risk, and I prefer Perez over Nicolau in tournaments.
Yeah, and the Occupied model agrees with you, ranking Perez over Nicolau, which is always notable. That is actually not foreshadowing. Generally, I've been playing the main event underdog who ranks higher in the model in our stream parlay. Not this week. I have something even better planned, so stick around to the end for that. And then, like you said, Jake, Nicolau, yes, it is always scary to fade a 5 round favorite, but he pretty much checks all the boxes, right? 8K favorite, so not a prohibitive favorite, lower volume, not expecting much on the ground. So though, and when they're 30% plus owned, those are the guys really you want to get underweight on or fade completely, especially like you said. Now in low risk, it is difficult to try to pick which one will outscore Nicolau if you choose to fade him. But in tournaments, if you're playing multiple lineups, you can pick any of these guys in this range or go with a stars and scrubs approach and have a much better chance of finding someone who scores 100 plus or more than Matheus Nicolau. So all right, moving on. Let's talk about these three newcomers. And we do have three, and we have multiple fighters after this for good fighter, good matchup, bad matchup. But we'll start with fight number 11, Hamis Yantop and Chris Padilla. Jake, talk to me about, one, how this fight came together, two, what makes Yantop mispriced, and three, given Padilla's lack of tape, how we can project him in his debut.
Yeah, so Top had been scheduled to face Lando Vignata. Vignata dropped out. Gabe Green stepped in, and then DraftKings, had the week off, so they got a little trigger happy and released salaries last Friday, like a week ago from today. And naturally, that was the same day that Gabe Green announced that he was injured and pulling out. So now we get mispriced. Top 8,200. He was negative like 115, negative 120 in that original matchup. Now he's up to negative 450. He should be priced at 9,300. Instead, he's 8,200. Obvious mispricing that everyone is going to be aware of. That's not going to go under the radar. He's going to be, it looks like the highest owned fighter on the slate. I'd be surprised if anyone got above him. I mean, it's just a massive value. So obviously, you got to jam them into low risk lineups, and then it becomes like a game theory play in high risk. But I mean, looking just a little bit more at him, outside the DFS thing, he's a 24-year-old coming in 14-2 with 8 finishes, coming out of Peru. He's fought at 155 and 170, so he's a bigger 155er, which is where he'll be making his debut. He actually missed weight by a half a pound, but I don't think that's a huge deal. He looked okay. Generally, when favorites miss by a small amount, it hasn't been terrible for their performances. So I'm not getting too hung up on that, but it just shows that he is a bigger guy for the division. Loves to work out of the clinch, tons of control time and clinch strikes. I think that makes him a better play on DraftKings, where those stats actually contribute and matter, opposed to FanDuel. But he definitely has finishing ability. He just wears on his opponents, lots of late TKOs, not much of a submission threat, but good volume and just like constant pace, which, we really want pace for DFS. So I think that's solid. So yeah, you just got to figure out, if you go underweight on this guy and he smashes, you're completely drawing dead. If you go overweight on him, I don't know if there's that much to be gained because, he's going to be like 50% owned. So it's tricky. It's a tricky spot, and you definitely have to be like super conscientious on how you build lineups that include him to avoid these highly duplicated splits at the top. So I would be pretty careful. If you're pairing him with a high-owned underdog, that's probably going to be a high-owned lineup. So definitely got to get some low-owned guys in there. Really think about the rules you're implementing in the builder, or if you're hand building. I think there's definitely a lot of game theory on this slate because he's so mispriced. And there's a lot of different strategies you can take, but there's a good chance he's going to be in the winner because, he just pushes a high pace, and he's going against a guy that stepped in on a week's notice, and Chris Padilla, who's making his short notice debut. And I guess we can just go right on to Padilla here. 28 years old, 13-6, 11 finishes. And the thing about Padilla, we were both, I feel like me and you are probably two of the better people at finding all the tape. This guy was hard to find a lot of his recent tape. They had like edited uh, footage for his last two fights, which was super annoying because it's like, here's half the fight. Like, just
Right.
give us the whole fight.
Right.
And then like the rest of his recent stuff was really hard to find. And then all of his old fights were on the internet. It's like, come on, man, like give us all of his more recent stuff. So I've seen a bunch of his fights, but there's a big gap in the middle. But I still feel like I have a really good feel for him. He's constantly looking to wrestle, uh, throwing lots of elbows, looking for submissions on the mat. He's coming off a second round TKO over Justin James, former UFC fighter. I mean, James is really a 145-pound fighter. That was a 155-pound fight. James is still disputing that stoppage to this day, claiming that it was illegal elbows to the back of the head. I mean, there were definitely some pretty sketchy elbows, but that sort of is what it is. Like, it's hard to kind of get stuff overturned after the fact. But yeah, Padilla does have good ground and pound, good wrestling, and that style is good for DFS. But man, it's such a tough circumstance coming in here on super short notice, fighting a bigger opponent. That I think it's going to be a really tough spot for him. But he could exceed expectations. I mean, just based on some of the limited footage available on him. But probably a guy will be more interested in his second fight. But I'm curious to see how he does. He's at a big size disadvantage. It's hard to be the wrestler when you're the smaller guy and find a ton of success. So we'll see how it goes. He only weighed in at 154 and a half. I think that just shows he's a little undersized, given that it was short notice and he still had a pound and a half to spare. So definitely a little undersized. I wouldn't be shocked if he moved down to 145 at some point in the future.
So one, it is tough to get fights overturned, especially in whatever underground organization they were fighting in with James and Padilla. Two, my question is for let's think small field GPPs, right? 100, 200, 300 players, and you're playing on DraftKings, and you look at Yontop, and he's 8,200. We expect him to be what? In small field, these types of guys end up 60, 70% owned, maybe higher. Is there any benefit to not playing him or just to locking him into all three of your small field lineups? What do you think? Because I'm debating that right now for small field. And yes, you don't want to end up playing 5v5, but this is a 13 fight card where we have 6 to 8 lower owned fighters, all of which I think have merit in playing. It's not like we have to play these super, super bad fighters that have no chance of winning and no chance of putting up a good score. The low owned fighters are viable on the slate. So I think that's what caused me to lean towards if you're playing small field, 3 max, just playing Yontop and playing multiple of the lower owned fighters.
I think that makes sense, man. I think we have a lot of good leverage points on this slate. I think a lot of people are going to just, in small field and large field, they're going to start with like Guskov, Yontop, and Dinez. So, like, given that we know kind of the core that the rest of the field's going to start with, I think it's pretty easy to create lineups that are different than that, even if you have Yontop. So, yeah, I mean, I think I'm really only looking to fade him in like the largest tournaments
Sure.
because there's just such a high chance that he ends up in the winning lineup just based on his style, based on his price, and based on the short notice nature for Padilla that it seems overly risky in small field to not just play him in all your lineups.
Right, because if he's up to minus 400 now, and we're just using rough numbers here, 80% win probability, and he has an 80% chance of scoring, even if it's an ill-timed finish or he gets controlled for a round or something happens or it's just, God forbid, lower volume and he scores 65, 70, you're still winning small field GPPs if the rest of your lineup is 6 out of 6 winners at $8,200. So you're really just trying to think of how can you really hurt me, and that you need a plus 350 underdog to beat him, and it's really not the risk you need to take in a 1 to 2 300 player GPP. So let's move on and let's talk about the other newcomer on the card. We have Jonathan Janice, which again, this is an all-timer for pronunciations on this card. But Jonathan Janice is undefeated. He is 9K. He is fighting Austin Lane. This fight is like minus 1 billion to end inside the distance. Talk to me about Janice, his fighting style in this matchup with Lane.
Yeah, so he's coming in 32-year-old Brazilian kickboxer, 6-0, all first round knockout wins, making his debut coming off Contender Series, where he got another first round knockout win. He only turned pro in May 2022, so still pretty green. And he hasn't faced anything in terms of competition. Like, all of his opponents have been absolutely terrible. He's shown no grappling. I wasn't even that impressed by his striking, honestly. Like he's supposed to be like a good kickboxer, but I think he went like 22-7 or something in kickboxing. Like he's not like one of these Pereira or even like the Almeida guys. They're like, okay, they were like world class, but nah, he was like a good kickboxer, like good kickboxer, like, decent. I don't even know how good he was, but he looks pretty hittable. Doesn't grapple. I mean, he has decent power and he's a big guy. But the biggest reason I like him is just the matchup. I mean, he's going against Austin Lane. It seems like every time Austin Lane gets even touched, whether it was in the UFC, on Contender Series, whenever he gets touched, he just goes out. So, like, you have to like Janice. Is it Janice or Denise?
Somehow
Like a J? Is
it
that
is
what we're
Janice.
going with?
Yep.
Okay. I'm glad you said it twice. I still had to check a third time. But, I mean, that's the reason to like him. Like, if it wasn't Austin Lane here, I would be really excited about fading him. But just the fact that it's Austin Lane and he's so fragile, like Austin Lane's basically like if you read between the lines, or maybe you don't even have to read between the lines, just listen to what he says. He says he's gonna wrestle. He
Yeah.
says he's gonna make it an MMA fight. But the only problem is Austin Lane's like not a good wrestler.
Yeah.
In addition to being fragile. So I really think they're trying to tee it up for Janice to get a strong start in the UFC. They love undefeated guys that have, nothing but knockouts. They need more heavyweights. And if they're building up a prospect here, the prospect is not 36-year-old Austin Lane, who's coming off, the immediate knockout loss to Justin Taffa after the eye poke, no contest to Justin Taffa. Like Austin Lane's the building block for these other guys. So I think they're just trying to build him up. But I do think we're going to see some growing pains for Janice. And I think as soon as he faces anyone that can grapple, he'll be in trouble. And even against good strikers, I think he's going to be in trouble. Like he gets hit a lot. So it's not impossible he loses, but he's got crazy odds. It's like negative 225 is inside the distance line, negative 150 for the first round finish. Yeah, like you said, negative 1100. The fight doesn't go the distance. So, I mean, someone's getting knocked out here. It's probably going to be Austin Lane, but, they're heavyweights. I'm not going to say Austin Lane can't win. If he gets the fight to the ground, it's going to get really interesting, but he just doesn't have very good top control. So I think he's probably going to struggle. And Denise at least showed the ability to defend takedowns against like super low level, like a bald, fat guy that was trying to take him down. I mean, I don't know like how much stock we can put in that, but yeah, man, I think both guys here are frauds. So who's the bigger fraud? And I think the bigger fraud is Austin Lane, and we'll probably play Janice here and then aggressively fade him in the future. But it's he could lose. You got to play both sides to some extent.
All right, I like that. I like that line of thinking. All right, let's move on. Let's play good fighter, good matchup, bad matchup. We will fly through these. It'll be very quick. Jake's going to be asked, is this fighter actually good or bad? Mostly for DFS. And is this matchup on this slate good or bad for that fighter? And we'll start from the first fight of the night until the last fight of the night. In the first fight, we have Mahashata up against Gabriel Benitez. Is Mahashata good or bad? Is this a good or bad matchup?
I mean, he's a decent striker, can't grapple, but it's a good matchup to get a knockout. So I guess I'll say he's a decent fighter and a good matchup. And he's fighting for his job, man, 1 and 2.
Yep, exactly. All right, next we have a battle of, I'll just say bad fighters, in Liang Na and Ivana Petrovic. Are either of these good or bad? And is this a good or bad matchup for either?
Yeah, they're both pretty terrible, but that makes it a good matchup for both of them because they both get to face a bad opponent.
Really quickly, projected ownership for these two fighters, both likely under 20%, which is exactly what we're looking for. And when Na has been finished basically immediately in most of her fights when she gasses out, and you look at her pace that she pushes, this has to be one of the fights that we look to target.
Absolutely.
All right, next we have one of your favorite fighters on the roster, Jake, Marnik Mann, and she is fighting Ketlin Souza, who has the unheralded title of exactly 0 DraftKings points to her name despite having one fight. So we have Souza, 0 points, Marnik Mann, 10 points, who was in the winner on that slate. Let's not us forget what happened on that crazy slate. Please talk to me about this matchup, Jake.
I mean, this really just feels like one big contender series card. But yeah, so Marnik Man, terrible. Through the unproven habitual knee injuries, got immediately knee barred by Karina Silva in her debut. So we didn't get to see anything out of her in that fight. But uh, I like to affectionately call her the fake Andrade. If you look at her, that's sort of how she looks. I think they're both bad fighters. I think Marnik Man is probably the worst fighter on the roster. So you have to think it's a great matchup for Souza here. And Souza does have some decent power. I will give her that. Like spinning kicks, overhand bombs, and I think she's going to be able to catch man here and probably get her out of there.
All right, next we have Caio Machado in a sloppy debut against Mick Parkin. He's up against Dontel Mays here. Is he good or bad? Is this a good or bad matchup? I don't even know why I'm at. These are all rhetorical questions at this point.
Yeah, they're all bad, which makes them all good matchups. I mean, they're all terrible fighters. Like Machado's not good. Like I was reading my write up from before his last fight. I'm like, yeah, this guy's gonna like lose all of his fights, maybe try to drop down to light heavyweight and then get cut. But here I am. I'm actually picking him to win because he's facing Dontel Mays, who's even worse. I mean, we had that one fight of Mays where he fought Josh Parisian and he wrestled. And we're like, oh, he can wrestle now. And then he went back to being terrible and
Yeah.
lost to like Hamdi, who took it on short notice, and he got busted for PEDs. And then, yeah, Mays has been awful. I think he lost like the last 3 decisions he's been to. I think it's going to be a sloppy heavyweight fight. And I think Machado probably squeaks out a decision. If Mays tries to take him down, maybe Machado goes for like a meme armbar and gets the 10-1 submission. I don't think that's impossible, but most likely outcome is a close decision win for Machado. He lands decent volume, but he's not looking to wrestle enough really to score well. And, it's hard to get there on volume alone at heavyweight.
Fair enough. Next, we have Michał Figlak, who scored 24 points in decision loss to Fares Ziam in his debut. His nickname is Mad Dog, though. Is he good or bad? Is this a good or bad matchup against Austin Hubbard?
Yeah, he hasn't fought in like a year and a half. He had ACL surgery, got out wrestled by a French kickboxer in Ziam. Like I was higher on Figlak coming into that debut. He had shown good striking volume. He would mix in wrestling, but he seems like the latest Polish fraud, man. I don't know. I don't trust this guy, but I was higher on him before his last fight, but I'm pretty low on him now. Honestly, I didn't even know where he'd been for the last year and a half until I looked into it. But long layoff, ACL surgery, really underperformed in his debut, and now he gets Austin Hubbard, who kind of makes everyone look bad, except for Kurt Hollowball, apparently. I think it's a bad matchup, and I'm gonna have to call Figlak a fraudulent bad fighter at this point. I mean, maybe he can prove me wrong on Saturday.
All right, next, moving up, we've already talked about Austin Lane. He is bad. I don't know what would be a good matchup for him, but is this as close to a good of a matchup he could get? I guess he would want like a lighter hitting heavyweight. I don't know.
Harry Hunsucker would be a good matchup for Austin
Call him
Lane.
up, get him on the roster.
Where's the Hunsuck at?
All right, bad fighter, bad matchup. But if he can get it to the ground, does he have a chance to look like the favorite here?
I actually don't think it's a bad matchup. I think he's a bad fighter and a good matchup because he's going to try to wrestle, and that is how you beat Janez. So, yeah, I'll say it's a bad fighter and a good matchup.
All right, we'll take that. All right, next we have Karine Silva, who apparently just subs everyone. So is she good or bad? Is this a good or bad matchup against Ariane Lipski, which is now Ariane De Silva?
Yeah, they changed that like today. Like, where'd that come from?
Oh, no.
Silva's a good fighter. I've been high on her since Contender Series, but this is a bad matchup, man. Lipski like flipped a switch ever since she moved to Florida. She's defended 25 straight takedowns against her. She's pulled off 3 straight upsets, and we continue to put her as the underdog every time. Lipski really turned a corner, man. Lipski's legit. It seems like she used to be the person we were trying to target when she was getting finished on the mat by Montana De La Rosa and Antonio Shevchenko. I think it's a bad matchup for Silva, So yeah, good fighter, bad matchup.
So cue up another round 1 sub coming for Karine Silva. Finally, we have Bogdan Gushkov, who got subbed in his debut, knocked out Zach Pauga in his second fight. Now he's major step up in competition here against Ryan Spann.
Yeah, we got another stunt double in here. We had the Jessica Andrade double with Souza, and now we get the Anthony Smith double with Gushkov. And yeah, this guy sucks, man. He's bad. He trains at Gore MMA, fraudulent gym. He keeps his hands down. He gets hit way too much. He can't grapple. I mean, you get submitted by Volkan Oezdemir, like just cut him right then. Like, that can't be allowed to happen. Instead, they give him a co-main event. He's a bad fighter. I mean, theoretically, I guess you could say like Ryan Spann is, in these action-packed fights where he either finishes the guy or gets finished. So I guess it's a high upside matchup, but I think Spann is much more talented than Gushkov. So I'm going to call him a bad fighter and a bad matchup.
Fair enough. All right. Before we close out the show here, we will go with our underdog pick'em play of the week. We will go with the fight that you have to target in DFS. There's so many to choose from. And then our stream parlay of the week. Before we do that, make sure you are subscribed to the channel here on YouTube if you like what you've seen so far. We do these videos every Friday or Saturday, depending on the time, as long as there are 12 fights on the card. Subscribing is the best way to get notified if we upload this video Friday night or if we do a live stream on Saturday. Giving a thumbs up is the best free way to support the video. If you want the extra edge, though, you like the free content, but you want to know every single thing you can about betting or DFS for UFC, check out Jake's site, MMADFS.com. Check out OccupyFantasy.com. The sheet, archive, premium content for Jake, the model, builder, plug at OccupyFantasy.com. We'll get you right and guaranteed to give you a leg up over the field. All right, Jake, moving on. Underdog Fantasy. We've been doing these pick'ems for the past few weeks. If those of you out there have not signed up for Underdog Fantasy, actually just came to Florida this week. So if you're a Floridian, make sure you sign up using promo code OCCUPY. Get a 100% deposit match bonus up to $100. They have Pick'em Champions, great format where you can play against other people in the Pick'em format. And Best Ball Mania starts for football, surprisingly, next week. So now's the time to sign up for Underdog if you're not already. Jake, you looked at all the lines, compared all your projections. Which Underdog Fantasy Pick'em play looks the best to you this week?
Yeah, I think I like Top over 48.5 significant strikes. When he does get finishes, they normally come later in fights. I mean, he does get a lot of clinch strikes, but I think he can get enough significant strikes to hit that over. I think he's going to be landing a bunch of volume.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right, next we have a fight you have to target in DFS. We've talked about so many here. Lots of, well, there are a few that are projected into round one, a couple that we expect to have high upside. Which one are you designating as the fight you have to target in DFS this week? Whoever wins is extremely likely to be in the optimal lineup.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely multiple, but I think you already hit mine with the spoiler. It's the Petrovic Liang Na fight.
The rare 12, 13, 14 fight card where a low owned fighter on both sides is Jake's fight to target. Always something to take note of. And let's close out with our stream parlay of the week, where I pick a side, total, or prop. Jake pairs it up. We parlay it together. We buy a car, depending on, or a scooter, depending on the size of the parlay. Looks like a pretty decent vehicle this week. Jake, we talked about Na. You just mentioned it. I'm going to go with her money line. Yes, she is 0-3. Yes, she has zero cardio. But I think she has a greater than 25% chance of winning this fight, which is better than what the odds indicate. And we don't know much about Petrovic. We know Na is at least aggressive. So Liang Na plus 380 on the money line is my pick. Doesn't rank above Petrovic in our model, but has a respectable OF index score, which is something to take note of. And again, I just think the line is too wide here for especially a women's MMA fight.
Yeah, I totally agree, man. I think Na wins this fight. I think Petrovic is a fraud.
Drink every time Jake says someone's a fraud. You would be blackout by the end of this episode. That is for sure.
I'm gonna pair that with Pierce round 2 or 3 KO. Typically with Pierce we get those late knockouts. Oh, Nama missed weight by 2.5 pounds on the scale today. I think at plus 700, that's just way too wide for something there. All of Pierce's finishes, basically. I think he had one submission in the UFC, but most of his finishes have come in late KO or TKOs on the mat normally. So if we pair those together, it's going to be plus 3740.
3740. We can certainly buy a vehicle with that. And Jake, we didn't talk about Pierce much, but obviously massive upside. Generally, ownership follows. Do we expect him to be pretty highly owned on this slate as well, despite his sub loss last time out against Joanderson Brito?
Yeah, he's still going to be popular. I think we'll get a little bit of a discount after that loss, but he's still going to be highly owned. He's always high owned. I mean, the field knows what's up with him. But he's a good play. He's a really good play. He's affordably priced. And if he loses, it's because Onama finishes him. So it's another easy fight to target, but super high upside fight. And yeah, I love Pierce in this spot.
Well, there you go. All right, guys, that'll do it for this video. We appreciate you watching. As always, you can follow Jake on Twitter at DFS_MMA. I'm at Brian Jesser FF. Also at Occupy Fantasy. Remember, MMADFS.com, OccupyFantasy.com, the two leading sites when it comes to MMA analysis for DFS and betting. So make sure you check us out after the show. And if you're not already, make sure you're subscribed. Something like 40% of our regular viewers are subscribed. That means 60% of you are not. So let's just rectify that. Click the subscribe button. It's free to do. Easy way to show support. Give us a thumbs up. Any questions you have, you can comment on the video. We will monitor the channel until lock 4 p.m. Eastern on Saturday. Or if you want in-depth conversations with us, talk with other members of the AccubatFantasy.com community, sweat out the fights with us, join our Discord server, AccubatFantasy.com/Discord. That link is in the description below. So for Jake, I'm Brian. Thank you for listening, and good luck at UFC Vegas 91.